a stud broken off on my 2010 Subaru Outback. I had a friend come over and help me do some maintenance to include rotating the tires, and when he put this stud back on, he cross-threaded it, so when I realized that it wasn't seated all the way, I tried to take it off, and of course it was cross-threaded and stuck on there, so it just snapped the stud off when I tried to take it off. So we're going to go through trying to replace this stud today. Well, trying to get this other lug off, or the rest of the lugs off. Another one was stripped on there, wouldn't come off, so I had to snap that one too. So now I've got two I have to replace. So I got the wheel off, it's jacked, I got the wheel off, and I've already broken the bolts loose on the caliper, so we're just going to take these bolts on the caliper off. And I can't really get the camera back there to show you, but I just have to take my word. There's a couple 17mm bolts back here, and it's pretty obvious which ones they are. Is that a 14? Yep, it's a 14. So there's two more bolts back here, and if you were just to change the pads, these are the bolts you would take off. And they're the ones that have the little rubber boots. There we go. And let me get this supported somehow. Better to hang this up by a wire than let it hang by the brake line. I mean, it'll probably hold just fine on the brake line, but may as well support it if we can. Now Subaru's actually got a pretty clever little design for getting their brake rotors out. They've got these holes in their rotors, because they do tend to rust down. It just happens. I can't remember what kind of thread this is. You'll have to do a little trial and error on it. But I just keep these in my toolbox for when I have to do brakes on this car. And I gotta find the right Allen. I thought I had one in here. I think it's a 6mm. And I'll see if we can do it with the screwdriver. I might have to use the ratchet to get a little more leverage on it. But all this is doing is pushing against the back, and there it is. Pulls the rotor off. And here are our lugs that are messed up. So I only have one wheel off the ground, which means I can't rotate this. So I'm going to have to put this all back together and jack up the whole front end so that I can rotate the axle around. Darn it. Alright, so I got the whole front end jacked up now, and got everything back disassembled. And now I need to try to beat these lug bolts out. And you can see now, because I have the whole front end off, I can rotate these to a place where when I hit them, they'll be on a clear spot in the back, as opposed to one of these spots where you know, the bolt's going to hit this flange on the back of the hub. let's beat a couple of these and see if they come out. And here's one, and I'm using a 4-pound sledge here. And there's two. I've got a couple new lug nuts and studs, and I've also got a 7/16 hex nut and some, or no, this is a 3/4 hex nut, and these are some 7/16 washers. And alright, so the reason that we have the hex nut is that when we pull this in, we're going to have the stud through the plate, and then we're going to put the hex nut on here, and it's going to ride against that plate, and we're going to draw this lug nut down, and as we do, it's going to pull the stud into the plate and seat it. And so we don't want this to get messed up right here, and so the bevel on that sits right inside. The bevel on this sits right inside that 3/4 inch nut, and I've got the washers to go. If I need a little more spacing, I can put them behind, so the washers fit over the thread. So that's what that's all for. Hopefully it works out. You're going to turn this until you find the right spot, and there's only one spot where you can barely get those in, and then you want to get this stack that you have thick enough so that while you're drawing down your nut, you don't shank out, because you're going to have a little shank sticking out. You can see on some of these. But you don't want it so much that you don't have anything grabbing on your nut. So I found that 3 of these washers, again these are 7/16 washers, and a 3/4 inch nut works pretty well, and you want to get that centered so that the bevel is going into the nut. And I had to get out my 1/2 inch ratchet, so I had enough leverage for this. And you just got to find something that you can use to brace in here so this thing doesn't turn on you. I'm using a breaker bar, but you can use a pry bar or whatever you have. Steel pipe or whatever you got laying around. You're just going to draw this in until you see it seat fully on the back. Probably wouldn't be a bad idea to put some oil, some WD-40 or something in there. I didn't really think to do that, but that wouldn't be a bad idea. You don't want to crank down too hard or you'll snap this, but just until it seats. That looks like it's seated. Maybe just a touch more. Looks good. So when I put the tire and everything back on, I'm going to torque it down, and I'll drive it, and I'll check the torque on these a couple times just in case these do decide to seat themselves a little bit more. And hopefully it'll let me slide this on here now. There we go. I'm not going to try to slide the camera back here, but we've got a couple of, these are 17. I think we need a 17mm socket for these. We got a couple big bolts in the back that are going to hold this on. Once you get that started, you can press the brake pads in, because that's what's going to keep the piston of the caliper from sliding over. One of the problems you might have when you're putting your caliper back together is getting it back on, because it's a tight fit. And so you can use a C-clamp and a block of wood, but I have this little tool you put inside the pistons, and it'll compress them so that you can slide the thing back on. If you're going to do this much, if you're going to compress these more than just a fraction of an inch, you're going to want to probably take some fluid out of your brake fluid reservoir on your master cylinder, because you can push enough fluid through the lines to overfill that. So don't go too much, or make sure you get that fluid out of your master cylinder first, or you may have some problems. So I think that's probably going to be enough for me. Slide that caliper on there, and then get your smaller bolts for the hold this on. And again, there's just these two bolts. So you have a total of 4 bolts here. And we're going to torque these down to the right value. But before we do that, we'll just get them kind of snug, and then we'll get our torque wrench out. Alright, we've got our torque wrenches set up, and our torque values are 27 Newton meters for the smaller bolts that take a 14 millimeter socket, and then 120 Newton meters for the bigger bolts in the back that take a 17 millimeter socket. There we go. Now when I put lugs back on a wheel, to make sure they don't get cross-threaded like they were, I like to take I just put a socket on an extension and kind of use it like a screwdriver. You don't want to use a power tool and have it be cross-threaded. That's one of the ones that broke off inside, which is why that's not working. So let's use one that doesn't have a bolt on the inside of it, so I can feel that that's started nicely. So with that, so I just get them, make sure that they're all snug. Again, I'm always going in my star pattern. And that one's not snug. Let's go around again. Alright, they're all snug, and so now we can put the car down, and I'll torque these down. Again, we're going 120 Newton meters in our star pattern. The job is done.